All right, welcome everyone. This is Monet the Creator, and I'm so excited to be bringing to you all this new podcast series, Navigating the Hidden Curriculum. I am joined today with my first guest, which I will introduce in just a moment. I'm definitely looking forward to our conversation today. Before we get started, I wanted to touch on why I created this podcast. Becoming a scientist is not necessarily the easiest path. In fact, many people have nonlinear paths, and because of this, it turns out to be a bit of a hidden curriculum that only some people ever learn, and sometimes it's a little bit too late down the line whenever they find out what the best thing is for them to do. The goal of this podcast is to share the scientific journey of others, as I believe this is one of the best ways we can learn what path may be best for us. Without further ado, I am so excited to welcome to the show my good friend and mentor, Yael Courtney. Yael is a senior PhD candidate at Harvard University, working under Dr. Maria Letnin to explore how the brain develops before we are born. She's especially interested in what types of maternal exposures might interfere with healthy development, like medication or recreational drugs. Yael is passionate about being the head of her own research group someday, where she will study chronic illnesses that happen after viral infection. Having entered academia from an unconventional background, she is also committed to breaking down barriers of all kinds that keep people from being able to understand and do science. It is such an honor to welcome you to the show, Yael, first and foremost. And for our first question, I remember back in the day when I was doing all my grant writing just a few months ago, reading in your statements that you gave me, the examples, that you read somewhere around 300 books in order to figure out what field of science you wanted to go into. What made you approach it in that way, and how did you land on neuroscience?
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Ebony. I did read 300 books, and I actually didn't even know I was going to go into science at that point. So I had recently left a pretty tough home environment, which had pros and cons, but something that I now look at as a real pro was that I no longer kind of had any direct pressures or expectations on what I was going to do with my life in general. And so at this time, I didn't graduate from high school. It's about where I was at, and I was managing a Wendy's in Ohio, and I had a lot of free time, and I wanted to think about what I wanted to do in life in general because, a lot of expectation previously was that I'd go to college, but I didn't know what for, and I didn't know if that was something that I'd actually need for whatever career it is that I wanted to do, and I had always loved to read as a kid, and so I thought that a good way for me to do some self-reflecting and thinking about my path was to just go to the library, wander around, see what books caught my eye, and what really organically excited me, like what I felt I was excited about and wanted maybe to do as a job. And I was open to really anything. I had dabbled in music, in acting. I was like, maybe I'll be a wedding planner. Who knows? I'm going to walk around and see what books call out to me. And it turned out over the course of these 300 to be at first an awful lot about like behavioral economics and psychology, and then about abnormal psychology and mental health and mental illness issues. Then I started to get into a little bit like what underlies these mental health issues and started reading about genetics and epigenetics. And then I realized like neuroscience was the name of a field and that this field wanted to know how the brain worked. And then I read one book specifically called The Brain That Changes Itself, Stories from the Frontiers of Neuroplasticity. And it was by this doctor, and he basically told 12 stories about times when patients had brain injuries or issues they recovered from, and we don't understand how. And I said, oh, if we could understand how, maybe we could use that to help other people. And that kind of told me that this was a field that I was interested in, I was excited about, and that there seemed to be a lot of potential for, which then sparked me doing an awful lot of Googling to figure out how one becomes a neuroscientist.
Yeah. A lot of good Googling.
Truly.
That's definitely very relatable. And somewhat related to that, and I guess we'll kind of go back to square one, but do you know what your earliest memory might be from science, or just maybe an experiment you did, or even, I don't know, a project? I know I remember doing like science fair from elementary school.
Yeah, so when I say, I didn't know I necessarily wanted to be a scientist, I did love math and science in elementary school. And actually, I would say part of my fondest memories are because my middle school science teacher, Mr. Coyer, was also the coach of our quiz bowl team. So if this gives you a sense for what kind of middle schooler I was, But he was just such like a loving mentor, and he encouraged us to like stay after class and stay after school and come like ask him questions. He was really good at earth science, and so we'd ask him all these questions about the earth and rocks and space and all this stuff. And because he gave us such like a nurturing environment, that made me feel like that was somewhere I wanted to be. And so he developed this image of me of like a scientist mentor who was kind and encouraging exploration and curiosity, which is like one of my earliest like fond memories of science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So while in this like earlier stage, or maybe like going through middle high school, I know that you said you didn't finish high school, but what in your studies did you find to be a little bit difficult, or what things maybe made you confident? I don't know if you want to answer one and then answer the other, but yeah, you can take a moment.
So I really loved math, and I was good at math, and I got a lot of validation for math. And then I started thinking about like what careers use math, and I got pretty frustrated because it didn't feel like a lot of them would feel good to me. People would be like, oh, go into accounting, go into like investments, go into insurance adjustment, or you could be a math professor. And I was like, I don't know that any of those feel amazing to me. So something that was difficult for me was reconciling my love of like solving problems and like figuring things out, which was what I loved about math, with the idea that there might not be a career there that I like at all. Mm-hmm. And so that was hard. I was like, well, what do I do then? Mm-hmm. Because I guess at the same time, somehow I didn't quite view like biology as the same kind of problem solving. I just didn't have that awareness. Yeah,
I went through that same thing, I think.
Well, and I just feel like also I had this perception that we just don't understand the brain, and we just don't understand a lot of how it works. And I wasn't aware that there was actually a lot of cutting edge science going on, and people were studying that, and we're actually making really big advancements.
Yeah. So after that point, whenever you realize, okay, I like problem solving, science is somewhere that I can problem solve, how did you know that science was the best career path? Or what point, even if it was in grad school, did you realize like, okay, this is definitely something that I want to stick with?
I think part of it is after learning about neuroscience as a career and learning that doing research is a job you can have. Mm-hmm. The reason I was interested in neuroscience is because I was interested in a lot of the questions it's trying to ask, especially about mental health. And a lot of personal experiences and experiences with friends had led me to feel pretty frustrated about the state of psychiatry and mental health research. For example, friends being told that we just don't understand that disorder, and so we can't help you. And then I came to realize that if I really want something answered, I probably have to research it. Like if I feel so passionately about something, I'm going to have to be the one that goes and asks that question. Because a lot of people I interacted with might have been dismissive of certain fields of neuroscience, or either because they felt it wasn't important or because they felt it was too hard and we simply wouldn't be able to get answers anytime soon. And then I didn't like that. And so I was like, well, I need to go do that then, which I later learned required a PhD. And so I'm here now, right?
Yeah, so that actually leads me perfectly into our next question. So what was your path then? So high school, working at Wendy's, deciding, yep, we're going to read all these books, we're going to go into science. How did we end up at Harvard?
Yeah, that's a good
Ask
question.
myself the same thing.
We started, I am a non-high school graduating Wendy's employee who decides that she wants to be a neuroscientist. The first thing I do is get my GED, my high school equivalency degree, because I know I'm not going to be eligible to apply for college or any kind of future step without that. So I study for a couple months, I take that test, I get my high school equivalency. And then, like I said, I was doing a lot of Googling. So on the one hand, I was very fortunate that I had this idea early that I wanted to be an independent scientist, because then I could frame some of my internet searches like, how do I become that? Which I learned was more than just a bachelor's degree and probably required an advanced degree beyond that, either a master's or a PhD. And so that framed kind of everything I was trying to put in action at that time. I lived in Northeast Ohio, and I ended up attending Kent State University for my undergrad. They very kindly offered me a full tuition scholarship, which meant I had to work for all of my other expenses and my room and board and all of that, but I was able to attend without paying tuition, which was the only way I possibly would have been able to go. And while I was there, I really wanted to take advantage of all the opportunities there while becoming a competitive candidate for PhD programs. So like I said, I feel very thankful that I realized early that a PhD was something I wanted, because then from the very beginning of my bachelor's degree, I was able to pursue things that, again, Google, it's going to be a theme, told me were really important, like research experience, like, of course, getting good grades, but then learning to talk about science and learning to read, like, the scientific literature or, like, primary research articles. And so I think because I had that vision from the beginning of my bachelor's degree, over those 4 years, I was able to become a candidate who would be competitive for programs like Harvard, which I'm so thankful to be here. I think it's one of the best neuroscience programs in the country.
Yeah. And somewhat related to that, are there any other things that you may have done that really set you apart in being a really good PhD candidate?
Like before I applied?
Yeah, before you applied. I think you know what I'm getting at.
I am one of the things early in my bachelor's degree that I found online at first was that you need to get involved in research. And that was a little vague. I didn't have a great sense about what that meant. And so I just found professors in my school who were doing research, and I emailed them and said, can I work with you? And 29 out of 30 did not reply, and one did. And I started working with him. And he was a psychology researcher. He worked with humans, and it was cool. And he actually facilitated later research opportunities for me. Dr. Hughes, thank you. Hopefully this story doesn't embarrass you. But 3 days after I interviewed to volunteer, actually, in his research lab, I had overheard some kids in the chemistry department saying that, oh, you need an REU if you're going to be competitive for grad school. So I'm Googling what's an REU, and it's a research experience for undergraduates. It's this summer program that pays undergraduate students to do research full time, which a lot of people use to make themselves competitive for grad school. And so I found this, and the application was due in like 2 days. And it's like, you need letters of rec. And I was like, oh, from who? And so I asked this man, Dr. Hughes, who had just met me one time and accepted me to work for him in the future, for a letter of rec for this summer program. And he wrote it for me.
Wow. Wow.
And that summer program was at Washington University in St. Louis. It was the BP Endure Summer Program. Shout out to the NINDS office for funding that. And I was able to do 2 summers of funded research at an incredible school and was able to get my name listed as an author on a research paper, which is something that is so important for grad school admissions.
Very powerful.
And it's really because Dr. Hughes took a chance. I think I can't imagine writing that letter.
Oh my gosh. And I always come back to this idea. I remember putting this on my undergrad application, like it takes only one person, and you don't need the whole swarm of the 29 plus other people that responded, but someone that actually had that, okay, I see something in you, I'll take a chance, we'll see what happens, and it can just completely change your life. I love to hear that. I really do. And somewhat related to that, and yes, we have Endure, we have these summer REU programs. We have, of course, like coursework, doing good in undergrad, having research experience, all those kinds of things. But in your eyes, what do you think makes a good PhD candidate? And you were, to my knowledge, an amazing PhD candidate whenever it was time for you to apply. So I do wonder, what was your standard? What did you think about whenever you were doing your applications of, okay, this is something that I definitely think makes me a strong candidate?
Yeah, this is something I think about a lot, both before I applied and now I do a lot of work helping people with their applications. And I've actually worked with my program at Harvard to do interviews of prospective students. Yeah. And so I think at the moment, the thing I've settled on as the most important is that for someone to like thrive in a PhD program, a PhD has to be the only option for them to do what they want to do with their life. Because if the reason why someone wants to do a PhD is just because that's an impressive degree or that's the next step and I didn't want to like make a decision about a real job, then that's not the kind of motivation that's going to get you kind of through this period of pretty intense research. And like for me, I realized I wasn't ever going to be able to lead a research group and asking and answering the questions I wanted without a PhD. And so when I applied, basically I applied straight from undergrad, but if I didn't get in, I was going to take a couple years off and apply again because I needed a PhD, period, to do what I want in life. And I think I tried to convey that through my application materials as well, saying, look, I have a vision for what I want to do long term. I need to lead a lab. I need to do this, and I will be getting my PhD, whether from here or elsewhere, whether now or later. I have to have this.
Yeah. Wow, that's a very strong piece of material. That that alone, I feel like, makes you a very strong candidate in the sense of like you know what you want. It's not so much of a, oh, I'm doing this because, like you said, it's the easiest next thing for me to do.
Which should never be the easiest next step. That's like, but people do that.
Yeah, they do.
That.
They do, and it's really hard to be in a PhD program and for you to not have that internal motivation of, yeah, I know that after this I'm going to run a lab, or after this I'm going to go into industry and be doing XYZ for this company. Like, not having that internal drive or motivator can really just, like, PhD programs are hard, y'all. It is not for the faint of heart. But yeah, that's such good tips there. So yeah, another question I have for you are, what tips might you have for young scientists and trainees today, specifically that are interested in going this PhD route?
Yeah, I mean, get involved in research however you can. Unfortunately, a lot of these opportunities at the beginning are volunteer, and efforts are helping to change that and make more paid opportunities, because having them be only volunteer is pretty exclusionary to students like me who had to work full-time in undergrad. It was hard to try to like find time for that. But as the system is changing, trainees, it's still so important to just try to be around people doing research, to understand what that's like and to get involved if you can, to have a vision for what it would be like day to day in a PhD or as a career, and if that's something you like or not. Just be around research. Definitely cold email. Even though I said, 3% of people replied, that's all you need. You need one lab to reply and say, yeah, we'd love to have you around. Mm-hmm. And just putting yourself in the spaces where people are doing that kind of science and work, either A, just to see if you like it, or B, to actually start getting involved, I think is so important.
Yeah. And actually related to that, what advice might you have for trainees and trying to figure out what would I like to do for my PhD? Because at the end of the day, you could do a PhD in English, you could do a PhD in humanities, you could do a PhD in so many wide range of things. Of course, science has a lot of structure there when it comes to, well, I wouldn't even call it structure necessarily, but there are like these REUs and certain things that people do put on their resume and help them be strong candidates. But what other thoughts might you have for that?
I guess it helped me to get the advice that what you do for an REU is not binding, nor is your PhD program name. Mm-hmm. So I'm getting my PhD in neuroscience, but I'm planning to pivot to kind of virology questions. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to apply those questions to the brain, given this really great foundation I have now. But whatever you choose, it should be something you're deeply interested in at that time, right? And that you're happy to, for a PhD, get really foundational coursework in and be taught by some of the best and be mentored by a great scientist. But it's also not binding for your life, and there is flexibility after that. But I guess for an REU, it's a summer. So if you're willing to buckle down for a summer in a topic, great, do it. For a PhD, it's 5 years or more. So it should be something you love enough and you want to learn deeply enough to do for that time. But at no point are you constraining your whole life to one subtopic at all.
Yeah, I think that's such a good way to put it, because even me, myself, so I'm in the biological biomedical sciences program, and my undergraduate degree was in neuroscience. I did the same summer indoor program as EIL, and whenever I went to apply to grad school, I applied for both neuroscience and biology programs, mostly neuroscience programs, and I realized very quickly, I was like, this is not what I want at all. So I definitely second that. It's okay to either have those pivots or to think oh, well, maybe I don't necessarily want to do that. It's fine. Or maybe you don't even want to do a PhD after hearing this. That is also fine. I think what's more important is for everyone to find what career and what passion they have truly and how to go about doing that. Yeah. Do you have something else?
Yeah,
go
so
ahead,
another
please.
small thought.
Yeah.
So something that for me during the summer undergrad experiences for research that told me I did want to do a PhD was that during the school year, I'd try to work in labs, and it was at most a few hours in an afternoon, which is super frustrating to me because it felt like I couldn't have my own project where I actually did all the experiments and saw it through, and I always would have to go pack up and leave to do my shift at Wendy's or whatever. And then in the summer research experiences, I would move to St. Louis, and I'd get paid enough, and I'd have housing to just be a 9-to-5 lab scientist. And I realized I wanted that. I didn't want to be distracted by all these classes in undergrad, by all these other jobs. And so in a PhD, your research becomes your job. And yeah, it's a lot of hours, but for me, I learned that I wanted it. I wanted to be able to just do my own projects and have that focused time. And that's kind of what a PhD is. So
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely agree with that. So I guess just to find out a little bit about your research, if you want to give us a little quick chalk talk, if you
Yeah.
will, of what you currently do in the lab.
Yeah, so I came to grad school broadly interested in neuroscience, thinking I was going to study psychiatric disorders maybe. And in choosing a mentor, I wanted to prioritize someone who was an excellent mentor, an excellent person who I thought I could learn a lot from. So, all that to say, the field I ended up in is not the field I thought I was going to study in grad school when I started. As Ebony said at the beginning, I work for Dr. Maria Lettinen, who's an incredible human being and mentor. And what she studies, and now what I study, is before birth. Well, she studies a lot of other stuff than this now, but
Yeah.
she started out mostly studying before a baby is born, how their brain develops and different things that can go wrong. Specifically by thinking about cerebrospinal fluid, which is the fluid in our brain that a lot of people know about because it cushions the brain from things like concussions, and it helps clear waste away from the brain, especially like while you're sleeping. But a lot of her early work showed that it's important for much more than that. And actually, in embryos, the stem cells that are these identical cells that have to divide to form all the different kinds of neurons in your brain, those stem cells actually get signals from cerebrospinal fluid, and it carries all these active molecules. And if something goes wrong with how the fluid and those molecules are communicating with the stem cells, the brain actually develops wrong. And so I came in, and my project has really been looking at, well, like, how do those signals get into the fluid? And, like, what could mess them up in that case?
Yeah.
And it's turned into this project where we found that certain things, if a mother is exposed to them, could actually really quickly get from the mother through the placenta to the developing embryo into the brain and mess up the fluid. And so my research has focused on a serotonin receptor called 5-HT2C. And the reason that's really interesting is because there's a couple of medications that are actually in clinical trials right now that target this receptor. One is for epilepsy and one is for autism spectrum disorders. And there's a lot of recreational drugs that activate this receptor specifically, not specifically, strongly, like psychedelic drugs. So my work has looked at the potential effect of psychedelic drug exposure to pregnant people on the developing embryo. And it's looking like it's probably not a good thing, which is important to flesh out because, you know, psychedelics are really becoming a very exciting topic for mental health disorders and other kind of medicines and treatments, which I think is incredible. And I think it's important to exercise equal caution in considering what patient populations these might not be safe for, like pregnant people.
Yeah, no, that's so incredible. And I would say, I mean, do you want to plug your bioarchive?
I have a preprint out on bioarchive right now. The paper is out for review in a journal, so fingers crossed that those reviews are positive and that we get a peer-reviewed edition here soon.
Yeah, so definitely go check that out. Maybe I'll link it somewhere for the video because I definitely want people to get more awareness on this. Plus, your bioarchive is like one of the most popular bioarchives known to man right now. So
I'm glad other people think it's cool. I think it's really cool.
No, I think it's, I mean, I see the live videos. I think it's sick. I think it's very cool. So actually with that, I do have just some final wrap-up questions. And I just want to see, I mean, this is something I'll probably do for all of my episodes, but I wonder how you'll answer these things. So what is something that you wish you could tell your younger self regarding your career in science?
It's going to work out. Like, it's worth trying this hard right now because it's going to work out and it's going to get easier.
Yeah.
Like, there was a couple years where, you know, I was working full-time and doing 2 majors in undergrad and volunteering in a research lab and sleeping about 4 hours a night. And I told myself that it was going to be temporary and it was going to be worth it. And looking back, I think it was. I wish I didn't have to do that, and I hope others don't. But I had so much uncertainty about whether that was even going to work out, like whether I'd get into college was the first thing, and then be able to go to grad school, and it did work out. And I was always very uncertain and anxious back then about if it was going to be worth it or if I would never get there. So
yeah, and that faith in knowing that it will always work out is how it always ends up working out.
Well, because I was going to make it work out.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever you have that thought of like, I'm going to make this work, it's going to work. What is some of the best advice you have received, either from another scientist, maybe at conferences?
Prioritize mentorship over science.
Wow. That's a good one.
If you start a PhD and you have a science question you think is really interesting, and you join a research group where the mentor is not a good person and doesn't have your interests at heart, then it's going to ruin that scientific topic for you. You may or may not finish your PhD. If you do finish, you're not going to be very happy, and it's not going to equip you for your career. And, I pivoted to a research question that I didn't know that much about before.
Yeah.
But with such a good mentor that now I'm leaving my PhD so excited about science and so well positioned. I'm going to cry. So excited to start a postdoc. I actually have a postdoc interview later today, and I'm excited, I'm happy, and I'm refreshed, and I feel healthier as a human than I ever have.
Yeah,
which I don't think is
good.
That common to be able to say. And, I have the rest of my life to do the specific research questions that are why I became a neuroscientist. And I'm glad I took these 5 years to become a good scientist under a good mentor.
Yeah, that's such good advice. And, of course, branching directly off of that, what is the worst advice you have received?
Join a famous lab. Go to a famous school.
Oh, my gosh.
So I understand I say that as someone at Harvard, right?
Yeah.
And so I knew this even when I applied to Harvard. People had told me, don't sell out for a name, whether that's a person or a school. And so I was really, really careful when I was evaluating my options for graduate school. I applied to places that were not names like Harvard, and I thought about them very carefully, and I made sure I asked students in this program if they're happy. And more than words, I wanted evidence that they were. I wanted to see them hanging out with each other. I wanted to see them at recruitment events. I wanted to see how fast they graduated. I wanted to see how they were supported if they had difficulties.
Yeah.
And I was not going to come here if it was not a place where students could be happy.
Yeah.
And the neuroscience program, I felt very much like it was a place students could be happy. And so far, so good. And I'm almost done. So I think we're going to be okay.
So it's going to be 10 out of 10s across the board. And my last question, if you could require all scientists to know a fact or receive a certain training, what would it be?
That's a hard question.
Yeah, it's a very hard question, and there's so many things.
I think this is more than one fact, but it's supported by a tremendous amount of research. The more diverse perspectives we bring into the scientific field, the more quickly we're going to advance science that's good for everyone, that helps improve human health outcomes across the board, and improves the progress, the rate of discovery of basic science. And that's bringing in people with every ethnic background, every religious background, every sexuality, from various socioeconomic levels, from different countries. Because if you want to ultimately discover mechanisms that are translational for everyone, you need people with these experiences coming in to do the work. And that's something that I feel people maybe aren't considering enough recently in America, and that I hope a lot of people are working really hard towards, and I hope that continues to be the case. We continue to see increased representation of people with unconventional pathways and historically excluded groups into science, because we know that science gets so much stronger when we do that.
Mm-hmm. It really does. And I feel like just thinking about lab makeup, our lab in itself is just absolutely incredible. We're in the same lab. So I just feel like a lot of that comes from, we have a lot of women, but we have such a diverse background.
Men are great scientists too.
We have such a diverse background of people in our lab, and even just people that aren't even necessarily core plexus biologists, for example, that in itself makes us such a strong lab. But yeah, oh my gosh, this was such a great interview. Thank you so much, Yael, for joining me for this today. And thank you all for listening to today's episode of Navigating the Hidden Curriculum. And I hope to catch you guys on the next one. Bye-bye, and I'll see you later.